In the year 2020, Ubisoft Toronto, the studio behind Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Blacklist and Far Cry 6, released Watch Dogs Legion, an open-world game set in the near-future London. The game will immediately tell players that this is not a regular city, rather it's an oppressed one with tons of mega-corporations trying to take over a world that is infested with different gangs and private military groups. Players will set foot in London as a DedSec member, a hacktivist group trying to fight against London's oppressors by creating resistance via non-violent methods. As soon as you get into the game, it'll occur to you that Legion lacks a main character. Unlike the previous Watch Dogs games, in Legion, you can choose to play as anyone, whether it's a Secret Service agent, a policeman, or even a grandma, it's all possible. I'm the Folk, and this is a brief look at Watch Dogs Legion's most important feature. I imagine that most of you have heard of Assassin's Creed Syndicate or Grand Theft Auto 5. These are some of the games that allowed players to change their main character during open-world gameplay. While in concept, they might sound similar to what Legion's doing, but in reality, what they're offering is totally different. Legion doesn't limit players to 2 or 3 playable characters. Instead, they get to choose from an endless list. What this means is you get to choose from characters with different looks, voices, and abilities at any given time. As cool as it might sound, there are problems with the way Ubisoft Toronto has executed this concept. For a game with multiple playable characters, you'd expect a level of variety matched by no other video game. Yet Legion fails in that regard. In the first couple of hours, you're greeted with the idea of open approach gameplay and agency beyond anything other video games offer. The game makes you believe that this is only possible because of its play as anyone system. And to some extent, it actually delivers that. But it gets worse as you proceed further. Unlike what it might suggest, except for a handful of missions where the game's story mode forces you to switch to different operators, you barely need to look for other characters for recruitment. Let me explain it this way. If you've found the construction worker with access to cargo drones, then you're almost set for the rest of the game. And the worst thing about it is that you can unlock this operator early on in the game. Since you can hop on top of the said drone, by flying it on top of a mission area, you can send the spider-bot, finish your objective, and be done with every single mission in the game. Yes, it still provides an awesome level of agency since you can proceed through missions in any way you prefer, but let's not forget the issue at hand. You don't need to change the operator you're currently playing with. The problem starts when later on in the game, you'll find out that any operator can summon a cargo drone using city platforms, ultimately rendering the construction worker useless. So you don't even need to play with that specific operator anymore. It's worth noting that cargo drones that are owned by construction workers are a tiny bit faster than the ones anyone else can summon through the city platforms. I don't know if that justifies the need of playing with a construction worker for you or not, but it's not enough for me. On the other hand, while you can share some of these abilities with any operator, some others are locked behind certain characters which are both understandable and questionable at the same time. If I can, for example, use the cargo drone with any operator, then why can't I have the silenced pistol or the ability to roll on the ground with a different one? I understand why they made this decision. It's obvious. But it's ultimately against the developer's end goal. Every character in this game can climb, jump, and swim. So why would Ubisoft Toronto lock simple character movement, such as rolling on the ground, to a certain type of character? On the topic of recruiting someone, there's some sort of paradox, or as Watch Dogs Legion's creative director Clint Hocking once said, ludonarrative dissonance present in the game. Ludonarrative dissonance is about the conflict between a game's story and gameplay. This very thing makes you question the whole play as anyone system in the game. So it goes like this. In order to recruit a new character as a DedSec member, you talk to whomever you choose, help them by usually going to a restricted territory, doing something dangerous, and finally return to them with the news of your victory. In the end, they'll be ready to pledge their life to DedSec. Ludonarrative dissonance becomes apparent when you instantly choose your newly recruited character and repeat the same process all over again. The newly recruited operator is capable of doing all the professional stuff that they've tasked DedSec to do for them. This thing happens without any form of training for the newly recruited operator, since it happens instantly after the recruitment is done. So the question here is, if anyone can simply do anything, why would they need DedSec's help? That's why Ubisoft should have come up with a better way for recruiting an operator. As I've mentioned before, all of the operators share most of the game's basic gameplay mechanics. They can shoot, take down enemies in a stealth, drive or hack basically anything. For a game that promises you that you can play as anyone, you'd expect a certain degree of variety, to say the least. For example, I expected some of them wouldn't even know how to drive a boat, or how to hack a computer by physical interaction. At least they could have done it for all their characters. Now, let's talk about something else for a change. There is a video game series called Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. They're both made by Monolith Productions. These games have a system called the Nemesis. Nemesis creates this very unique scenario where each enemy you fight will react to your actions throughout your experience. Some of these enemies will die, while others might get promoted to a higher rank. They might fight each other, and some might even go through the extra mile to take revenge on the main character Talion. These unique scenarios are accompanied by characters with different looks, voices and dialogues in a different way compared to Watch Dogs Legion. Some of these NPCs will learn your battle tactics in order to counter your attacks. These are some of the tools that ultimately create emergent storytelling. If you're unfamiliar with the term, it basically means the stories that players create for themselves by interacting with different systems of a game. Sadly, Monolith Productions is owned by Warner Bros. Games, and the latter company has patented the Nemesis system, so no one else but their studios can use it in their games. But that's not me saying that Legion would be a better game if Ubisoft Toronto could simply slap Nemesis into the game. No, Legion still provides emergent storytelling, but it's totally lackluster compared to Middle-earth games. Now, the point of this comparison was to point out that the devs needed to make each character of Watch Dogs Legion a small part of the world, similar to how Monolith did this to Talion. In Middle-earth games, everything except for the main story, and of course side stories, would move forward without players' actions, and that made the world much more alive. It's worth mentioning that you could enjoy the emergent storytelling in Legion way more if you choose to play it on the hardest difficulty, with permadeath mode enabled. Doing so would ultimately make you want to be more careful about your every step in the game to avoid losing an operator. Maybe in this way, you as the player develop feelings for a character and don't want to risk their lives in any scenario. But then again, doing so means repeating the same play style with every operator, which is totally immersion breaking in this case, and kills the whole idea of playing as anyone, as I've mentioned earlier. Ubisoft Toronto could make play as anyone more interesting if they gave it more depth. They could do this simply by making operators interact in a meaningful way with their surroundings. They could at least react to the demise of their enemies or allies. I wish characters had deeper tasks that would ultimately end up affecting the entire city. I would have loved to see enemy leaders trying to take back liberated areas of London from players by simply forming new alliances and plan the strikes against DedSec members. How cool would that be? I should mention that there are small hints of things moving forward without players' actions in Legion. For example, it's possible that suddenly some of your operators get kidnapped. You can choose to rescue them, but it's always portrayed in the same way. The worst thing that happened to me was it always happened to one single operator every time. So, if the world can progress without players' actions, and the game tells you that it has the fundamentals for it, then it needed more detail. If Ubisoft Toronto could pull that, maybe they didn't need to make each character feel artificially different. The aforementioned items lead to the characters' schedules as citizens of London. These schedules create no specific dynamic in the world. They're mostly about characters wandering around in the streets, hammering down something for a couple of hours, or standing in a specific location like a cemetery or a protest just to return to their homes later on. I expected them, for example, to go to their work as a bartender and have a real effect on that specific job. Imagine if they're absent for a day, then you can't enter the bar, or can't order anything until they return. What happens if they're replaced by a new bartender who might even lack some experience? I wanted the world and its characters to be more human-like. Since the game sets itself up as a unique experience, I expected the developers who came up with this idea to shake the game industry with Legion. I guess my expectations were too high from a AAA game in 2020. Also, let's not forget that since you can play as anyone in this game, there is an expected level of lag in the voice acting quality, and as expected, it's really awful.
I work for Clan Kelly as a smuggler. It was meant to be a one-time thing, then just an occasional contract, all harmless things like imported wine or luxury brands, but I got pulled in deep. Now I'm involved in helping move a massive arms shipment. Christ.
I'm listening.
Characters usually say their lines in a machine-like way, without caring about the situations they're in. Issues like this tend to happen when the developers decide to use machine learning systems rather than a high-quality voice acting session. Although, due to the sheer size of the game, I believe it wouldn't be possible for it to have such voice acting sessions for each character in the game. But in the end, when all of these stuff piles up, Watch Dogs Legion disappoints you. You can see the potential in the game. It's right there. But the team behind it just poorly executed the whole concept. Maybe the reason behind all of that is because of the budget restraints. Or maybe it's a lack of development time. I don't know for sure. After all, Watch Dogs Legion was being made during the dark era at Ubisoft where everything had to be a clone of Tom Clancy's The Division. A looter-shooter type of game with RPG stats, level-based characters, and bullet-sponge enemies. Some of these elements, like character stats, were originally a part of this game as well. There were also hints of other small details that are now scrapped from the game completely. Details such as operators reacting to their teammates' death, or even interacting with one another about almost everything. And they could even call each other by their actual names. All of these elements were present when they first revealed the game. But Legion ultimately got delayed due to external issues at Ubisoft, which I believe is connected to Ghost Recon Breakpoint's failure and the mismanagement at the company during that time. And in the end, the final game has turned out to be a completely different product. Either way, I wasn't trying to bash the game or ridicule Ubisoft Toronto's efforts. Watch Dogs Legion could have been a great game, but sadly it turned out to be a forgettable one. I really hope if they ever continue to expand upon this idea, we get a far more complex system. Otherwise, they should stick to having a single playable character with a full backstory and better voice acting. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please like, subscribe, and tell your friends about the channel. Also, share your opinion about the game's Play As Anyone system in the comment section. Until next video.